On her wedding night, Elena Whitmore whispered three words that would change everything. Please don't touch me. Her new husband, Dominic Hale, Chicago's most feared crime boss, had crushed empires and ended lives without hesitation. But the bruises hidden beneath his bride's silk gown revealed a war he never expected to fight. This wasn't a business arrangement. It was a rescue mission wrapped in wedding vows. What Dominic discovered that night would ignite a war that would burn through Chicago's underworld and expose a monster everyone had protected. If you're ready for a story of darkness, redemption, and love forged in fire, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far Elena's story travels. The Cathedral of St. Benedict stood like a Gothic fortress against Chicago's steel-gray sky, its spires piercing the clouds as if attempting to reach salvation the people inside would never find. Inside, 200 guests filled the pews, men in custom suits worth more than most families earned in a year, women draped in jewels that could fund small countries, all of them bound together by blood, money, and secrets dark enough to drown in. Elena Whitmore stood at the altar in a gown that cost $60,000, feeling like a corpse prepared for viewing. The dress was exquisite, French lace over silk, hand-beaded with thousands of tiny crystals that caught the stained glass light and scattered it across the marble floor like broken promises. The bodice fit perfectly. The train flowed like water, and the veil obscured her face just enough to hide the terror in her eyes. She was 24 years old and had learned long ago that beauty could be a weapon used against you. Beside her stood Dominic Hale, the man who would become her husband in approximately 4 minutes. She had met him exactly 3 times before this moment, twice at formal dinners where conversation had been carefully monitored, once at the contract signing where lawyers had outnumbered family members. He was 32, 6'3", built like violence had been carved into muscle and bone. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, probably Italian. His dark hair was swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so carefully controlled. Sharp jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of whiskey that seemed to catalog every detail, every weakness, every fear. Elena had researched him, of course. She knew what everyone in their world knew. Dominic Hale had taken over his father's organization at 25 when the old man had been killed in a power play. Within 6 months, Dominic had eliminated every person involved in the assassination, not just the trigger man, but everyone who had known, everyone who had helped, everyone who had stayed silent. 17 people had died. The message had been clear. Betrayal would be answered with annihilation. He controlled the South Side with an iron grip: gambling, protection, cargo theft, money laundering through a network of legitimate businesses that generated millions. He was ruthless, efficient, and according to every source Elena had found, utterly merciless when crossed. And in approximately 4 minutes, he would own her. The priest droned through the ceremony, words about love and devotion and eternal partnership that meant nothing in this context. This wasn't a marriage. It was a merger. The Whitmore family needed Hale protection and resources. The Hale organization needed Whitmore political connections and respectability. Elena was simply the collateral that sealed the deal. She had known this day was coming for 6 months, ever since her father had informed her over breakfast that her wedding had been arranged. She hadn't been asked, hadn't been consulted. Her opinion had been as relevant as a lamp's opinion about which room it would illuminate. "Do you, Elena Marie Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The priest's question cut through her thoughts. Elena felt 200 pairs of eyes on her back, waiting. Her father sat in the front pew, his expression carved from stone. Beside him, Victor Langston watched with the same predatory focus a snake gives a mouse before striking. Elena's hands trembled. She gripped her bouquet tighter, white knuckles against white roses. "I do," she whispered. The words tasted like ash. Dominic's response was steady, certain. "I do." When he lifted her veil, his eyes met hers for the first time that day. For just a moment, something flickered in those whiskey-colored depths, concern, curiosity, before his expression smoothed back into careful neutrality. His kiss was brief, formal, his lips barely brushing hers. Professional, transactional. The guests applauded, the organ swelled. Rice was thrown as they walked down the aisle together, Elena's hand resting lightly on Dominic's arm, her smile fixed in place like a death mask. She had survived the ceremony. Now came the harder part. The reception was held at the Blackstone Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with old money and new corruption. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables laden with food most of the city could never afford. A 12-piece orchestra played while Chicago's criminal elite danced, drank, and made deals that would never appear in any contract. Elena moved through it all like a ghost, accepting congratulations from people who didn't care, smiling for photographs that would be displayed in a home she'd never chosen, playing the role of the blushing bride with the precision of someone who had learned that survival depended on performance. "You look beautiful, my dear," Victor Langston said, appearing at her elbow with the silent stealth he'd perfected. He was 53, silver-haired, distinguished in a way that made people trust him right before he destroyed them. He had been her father's closest business partner for 15 years. He had been hurting Elena for 12. "Thank you, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice steady despite the way her stomach clenched at his proximity. His hand settled on her lower back, fingers pressing just hard enough to find the bruise beneath the dress's boning. Elena's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned not to flinch. "Such a perfect bride," Victor continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I almost hate to give you up. But business is business, isn't it? And you've always understood the importance of duty." "Elena." Dominic's voice cut through the moment like a blade. He appeared beside them, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold as he looked at Victor. "They're waiting for our first dance." Victor's hand withdrew. "Of course. Congratulations again, Dominic. You've acquired a rare treasure." "I'm aware," Dominic said flatly. He guided Elena to the dance floor, one hand settling at her waist, the other taking hers with surprising gentleness. The orchestra began a waltz, and they moved together with the mechanical precision of two people who had practiced this exactly once, 3 days ago, with a dance instructor who had been paid handsomely for discretion. "Are you all right?" Dominic asked quietly. The question surprised her. Elena looked up at him, searching for mockery or manipulation, but found only genuine concern. "I'm fine," she lied. "You flinched when Langston touched you." Elena's heart hammered. "I didn't—" "You did." Dominic's hand at her waist shifted, his touch becoming even lighter. "I'm observant, Elena. It's kept me alive in a business where most men don't see 40. And I saw the way you looked at him." Fear lanced through her. If Dominic suspected, if he asked questions, if Victor found out she'd shown weakness— "It's nothing," Elena said quickly. "Just wedding nerves." Dominic studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll talk later, after this circus ends." The dance continued. Around them, other couples joined, her father with Dominic's mother, various underbosses with their wives and mistresses, Victor with a woman young enough to be his daughter. The ballroom spun like a carousel of beautiful monsters. Elena endured 4 more hours of celebration. The toast, the cake cutting, the bouquet toss, all the rituals that were supposed to mark the happiest day of her life. By the time Dominic finally guided her toward the exit, her face hurt from smiling and her entire body ached with tension. The limousine ride to Dominic's mansion in Lincoln Park was silent. Elena sat on one side, Dominic on the other, an ocean of leather seat between them. She stared out the window at Chicago streaming past, lights and shadows, wealth and poverty existing side by side, a city built on contradictions. The mansion was exactly what she'd expected, a Georgian revival estate behind iron gates, all red brick and white columns, beautiful and imposing in equal measure. Old money architecture housing new money corruption. The staff had been dismissed for the night, giving them privacy. Dominic's housekeeper had left champagne chilling and rose petals scattered across the master bedroom in a romantic gesture that made Elena want to vomit. She stood in the foyer, still in her wedding dress, feeling the weight of what came next pressing down on her like a physical force. "Would you like something to drink?" Dominic asked, shrugging out of his jacket. Without it, he looked slightly less intimidating, though the shoulder holster he wore was a stark reminder of exactly who she'd married. "No, thank you." He nodded, loosening his tie. "The bedroom is upstairs, first door on the left. Your things have already been moved in." Elena's hands twisted together. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading since her father had announced the engagement. She tried not to think about it, tried to prepare herself, but now that it was here, panic clawed at her throat. She was expected to consummate this marriage, expected to submit to her husband as she'd submitted to everything else in her life, expected to endure. She'd endured before. She could do it again. Elena forced herself to move toward the stairs, each step feeling like walking toward an execution. Behind her, she heard Dominic pouring himself a drink. The master bedroom was enormous. California king bed, fireplace, sitting area, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Elegant, expensive, impersonal. Her suitcases stood near the walk-in closet, her temporary possessions waiting to be integrated into this permanent prison. Elena walked to the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, hair still perfectly styled, makeup still flawless, the perfect bride. She began removing the hundreds of tiny buttons that ran down the back of the dress, her fingers shaking. It took 15 minutes to get them all undone, another 5 to step out of the gown and hang it carefully in the closet. Underneath, she wore white lace lingerie that had been selected by a personal shopper, chosen specifically for this night. Her body was thin, too thin, she knew. Years of controlled eating had left her with sharp collarbones and visible ribs. But that wasn't the worst of it. The bruises were the worst of it. They covered her like a map of pain, yellowing marks on her ribs from 2 weeks ago, purple shadows on her upper arms from last week, a fresh red welt on her lower back from yesterday morning. Victor had been careful, as always, to avoid anywhere that might be visible in the wedding dress. Elena pulled on a silk robe, belting it tightly. She brushed out her hair, removed her makeup, went through the motions of the nighttime routine she'd perfected over the years. When she finally opened the bathroom door, Dominic was sitting in one of the chairs by the fireplace, still dressed except for his jacket and tie. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand and was staring into the unlit fireplace with an expression she couldn't read. "Elena," he said, not looking at her. "Come here." It wasn't a request. She'd learned to recognize commands disguised as invitations. She crossed the room on silent feet, stopping a careful distance away. "Closer," Dominic said, quietly. Elena moved closer, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. When she was within arm's reach, he finally looked at her. "I need you to understand something," he said. "This marriage was arranged by our families for political and financial reasons. I agreed to it because it benefits my organization. You agreed to it because—" He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Because you had no choice." Elena said nothing. What could she say? "I'm not a good man," Dominic continued. "I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I've built an empire on violence and corruption. But I have rules, lines I don't cross." He set down his glass and stood. And even though he didn't move closer, Elena felt the space between them shrink. "One of those lines is forcing a woman into my bed." Elena blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You're afraid of me," Dominic said. It wasn't a question. "You've been afraid all day, and you're terrified right now." "I'm not," Elena started. "Don't lie to me." His voice was sharp but not angry. "I told you, I'm observant. I saw the way you went pale when the priest mentioned conjugal duties. I saw the way your hands shook when we came upstairs. I see the way you're standing right now like you're preparing for an assault." Shame burned through Elena's chest. "I apologize. I didn't mean to Stop apologizing." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "This isn't about apologies. This is about establishing how this marriage is going to work." He walked to the windows, putting distance between them. "I don't know what you've been told about me. Probably that I'm a monster. That's not entirely wrong. But whatever you're expecting tonight, it's not happening." Elena's mind struggled to process his words. "I don't understand." "Which part?" "Any of it." Dominic turned to face her. "We're married. That's done. Our families have what they wanted. But what happens in this house, in this room, that's between us. And I'm telling you that nothing happens that you don't explicitly consent to." "But the marriage needs to be—" Elena stopped, her face flushing. "Consummated?" Dominic's laugh was bitter. "Let me worry about what our families expect. You just worry about surviving the situation you've been forced into." He moved toward the door. "The bed is yours. I have a study downstairs where I'll sleep tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss the practicalities of this arrangement. Public appearances, household management, the things we need to coordinate. But tonight, you're safe. Do you understand? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Dominic paused at the door. One more thing. That robe you're wearing, it's not closed as tightly as you think. And I can see bruises, Elena. Old ones and new ones. Bruises that have nothing to do with accidents. Elena's hands flew to her robe, cinching it tighter, but it was too late. Who hurt you? Dominic asked, his voice dropping to something dangerous. No one. I'm clumsy. Don't. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and Elena stumbled backward until she hit the wall. Dominic stopped just short of touching her. One hand braced against the wall beside her head, his eyes blazing. I've seen abuse, Elena. I know what it looks like. Those bruises are systematic. Someone has been hurting you deliberately, carefully, for a long time. Tears burned Elena's eyes. She couldn't do this, couldn't talk about it. If she talked about it, Victor would know, and then it would get worse, and please, she whispered, the word breaking. Please don't ask me this. Something shifted in Dominic's expression, the anger banking, replaced by something that looked almost like pain. All right, he said quietly, stepping back. All right. Not tonight. He moved toward the door again, then paused. But Elena, whoever hurt you, they're going to answer for it. That's a promise. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Elena stood against the wall for a long moment, her legs shaking too hard to support her. Then she slid down to the floor and buried her face in her hands. For the first time in 12 years, someone had seen her pain and offered protection instead of causing more. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Elena didn't sleep. She lay in Dominic's bed, her bed now, she supposed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Every creak made her tense, expecting Dominic to change his mind and return, but the door stayed closed. At 3 in the morning, she finally gave up on sleep and wandered to the windows. The garden below was perfectly manicured, even in the darkness. Neat hedges, stone pathways, a fountain that caught the moonlight. Beautiful and controlled, like everything else in this world. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Elena picked it up, her stomach dropping when she saw the sender. Victor. Beautiful ceremony. Sleep well, little bird. We'll talk soon. The message came with a photo. Elena and Dominic at the altar, the moment after their first kiss. But it wasn't the image that made Elena's hands shake. It was the reminder that Victor was still watching, still waiting, still in control. She deleted the message and turned off her phone. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena forced herself into the shower. The hot water stung against her bruises, but she welcomed the pain. It was familiar, grounding. She dressed carefully in slacks and a high-necked blouse that covered everything that needed covering, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen was massive, professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, an island that could seat 8. Dominic stood at the stove, cooking eggs with the same focused precision he probably brought to everything. Coffee's fresh, he said without turning around. Mugs are in the cabinet above the pot. Elena poured herself a cup, adding cream from the refrigerator. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal. How do you like your eggs? Dominic asked. I don't usually eat breakfast. He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You don't usually eat much of anything, from what I observed yesterday. You barely touched your food at the reception. I wasn't hungry. Or you're not allowed to be hungry. He plated 2 servings of eggs, added toast, and set both plates on the island. Sit, eat. Elena sat but didn't touch the food. Dominic took the stool across from her and began eating his own breakfast, seemingly unconcerned by her hesitation. We need to establish some rules, he said after a moment. First, this house is neutral territory. Whatever happens outside these walls, business, family politics, all of it, it stays outside. In here, you're safe. Safe from what? From anyone who wants to hurt you, including me. Elena looked down at her plate. You don't know what you're offering. Then tell me. She shook her head. I can't. Dominic set down his fork. Let me guess. You've been threatened. Someone told you that if you talk, there will be consequences. Not just for you, for someone you care about. Elena's silence was answer enough. Here's what you need to understand, Dominic continued. I'm the head of one of the most powerful crime families in Chicago. I have resources, connections, and enough firepower to start a small war. Whoever is threatening you, they're not untouchable. You don't know that. Try me." Elena met his eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine determination. Not the cold calculation of a business deal, but actual commitment. It terrified her almost as much as it tempted her. "Eat your breakfast," Dominic said, his tone gentling. "We don't have to talk about this now. But we will talk about it, Elena. Eventually." She picked up her fork and took a small bite of eggs. They were perfectly cooked, seasoned just right. Under different circumstances, she might have enjoyed them. "Second rule," Dominic said, "public appearances. We'll need to present as a united couple. Dinners, events, family gatherings. I'll need you to play the role of devoted wife. In exchange, I'll ensure you're never alone with anyone you're uncomfortable with. That might be difficult to arrange. Let me worry about the logistics. You just tell me who to watch." Elena took another bite, considering. "And in private?" "In private, we're roommates, partners in a business arrangement. I won't make demands on your time or your body. You're free to come and go as you please, as long as you clear it with my security team first." "So I'm a prisoner with better accommodations." Dominic's jaw tightened. "You're my wife. That means you're under my protection, which includes protecting you from being kidnapped or killed by my enemies. The security isn't about controlling you, it's about keeping you alive." Fair enough. Elena had lived with security her entire life. At least Dominic's guards would be competent. "What do you get out of this arrangement?" she asked. "Political capital, your father's connections, the appearance of stability that comes with marriage." Dominic shrugged. "The usual reasons for arranged marriages in our world. That's all? What else would there be?" Elena studied him. This man who had shown her more kindness in 12 hours than she'd experienced in 12 years. "I don't understand you. You're not supposed to, not yet." He finished his breakfast and stood. "I have meetings all day. Marco will be your head of security. He'll introduce himself later. If you need anything, tell him. If there's an emergency, there's a panic button in every room." He pointed to a small device mounted near the door. "Press it, and armed response arrives in under 90 seconds. "Armed response for what?" "For whatever makes you press the button." He started to leave, then paused. "Elena, the bruises I saw last night, when did you get the most recent one?" Elena's hand unconsciously went to her lower back. "Yesterday morning. Before or after you arrived at the church?" "Before." Dominic's expression went carefully blank in a way that made him look more dangerous than any show of anger could have. "Understood. Enjoy your day." After he left, Elena sat alone in the enormous kitchen, coffee going cold in her hands. For the first time in her life, someone was asking the right questions. She just didn't know if she was brave enough to give the answers. Elena spent her first week as Mrs. Hale learning the geography of her new prison. The mansion had 23 rooms spread across 3 floors, each one decorated with the kind of tasteful wealth that came from hiring expensive designers and never questioning their choices. The library held first editions she wasn't allowed to touch. The dining room could seat 30. The wine cellar was climate-controlled and stocked with bottles worth more than cars. None of it felt like home. Marco Russo, her head of security, was a boulder of a man, 6'5", 260 pounds of solid muscle, with a face that looked like it had lost several arguments with brick walls. He introduced himself the day after her wedding with military precision. "Ma'am," he said, standing in the foyer like a wall made of flesh. "Mr. Hale has assigned me to your protection detail. I'll be with you whenever you leave the property. 2 additional guards will rotate through interior posts." Elena looked up at him, and up and up. "Is that really necessary?" "Mr. Hale thinks so. That makes it necessary." She learned quickly that Marco took his job seriously. When she went to the garden, he followed at a discreet distance. When she retreated to the bedroom, he posted himself outside the door. When she ventured to the library, he stationed himself where he could see all entrances. It should have felt oppressive. Instead, it felt oddly safe. The rest of the staff maintained professional distance. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, was an efficient Chinese woman in her 50s who managed the household with quiet authority. She laid out clothes Elena never asked for, prepared meals Elena barely touched, and never once asked intrusive questions. Dominic himself was largely absent. He left before dawn and returned after midnight, their paths crossing only at carefully orchestrated moments, breakfast twice that first week. One formal dinner with business associates where Elena played the devoted wife with practiced ease. When they were alone, he was unfailingly polite, distant. He never touched her without warning, never raised his voice, never made demands beyond the occasional public appearance. It was the kindest cage Elena had ever inhabited. On the 8th day of her marriage, her father called. Elena stared at her phone screen, watching it ring, her stomach twisting into knots. She hadn't spoken to Richard Whitmore since the wedding, hadn't wanted to, but ignoring him wasn't an option. "Hello, Father." "Elena." Her father's voice was clipped, businesslike. "I'm calling to check on your adjustment to married life." Translation: "I'm calling to make sure you're fulfilling your obligations." "Everything is fine," Elena said carefully. "Dominic is treating you well?" "Very well." "Good. Victor mentioned he hasn't heard from you since the wedding. He's concerned." Of course he was. Victor always needed to maintain contact, needed to remind her that his reach extended beyond her father's house, beyond any protection she might have hoped for. "I've been settling in," Elena said. "Please give him my regards." "You can give them yourself. He's invited you and Dominic to dinner Friday evening. I expect you'll attend." It wasn't a request. Elena's free hand clenched in her lap. "I'll have to check Dominic's schedule. I already spoke with him this morning. He's agreed. 7 o'clock at Victor's estate. Don't be late." The line went dead. Elena sat in the morning room, phone gripped so tightly, her knuckles went white. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare herself for an evening in Victor's presence, in his home, where his control would be absolute. The panic attack hit like a freight train, chest tightening, breath coming in short gasps, the room spinning around her. She doubled over, trying to remember the breathing exercises her childhood therapist had taught her before her father had decided therapy was a waste of money. "Mrs. Hale?" Marco's voice cut through the panic. He must have heard something, her breathing maybe, or some sixth sense developed from years of watching for threats. "I'm fine," Elena managed, but her voice shook. "You're not." Marco stepped into the room, maintaining careful distance. "Should I call Mr. Hale?" No, please don't. I need a minute." Marco studied her with sharp eyes, then nodded. "I'll be outside if you need anything." After he left, Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale until the panic receded to manageable levels. She couldn't fall apart. Not here. Not where people were watching. She made it until midnight before the nightmares started. Elena woke screaming, tangled in silk sheets, Victor's hand still phantom real on her skin. The bedroom door burst open and Marco rushed in, weapon drawn, scanning for threats. "What happened?" he demanded. "Nothing. Bad dream. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But Marco was already speaking into his radio. "Stand down. False alarm." He holstered his gun and looked at Elena with something that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Hale is on his way up." "That's not necessary." Dominic appeared in the doorway, still dressed despite the late hour, his expression sharp with concern. "Marco, give us the room." "Yes, sir." After the door closed, Dominic moved to the sitting area, careful to keep distance between them. "Another nightmare." Elena pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly aware that her nightgown was damp with sweat and her hands were still shaking. "How did you know there were others?" "Mrs. Chen mentioned you've been waking up screaming every night this week. I wanted to give you space, but..." He ran a hand through his hair. "Elena, you can't keep doing this to yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not." Dominic's voice was firm, but not harsh. "And before you tell me again that I don't understand, let me save you the effort. You're right, I don't understand, because you won't tell me what's happening." Elena looked away. "You wouldn't believe me if I did." "Try me." The words hung between them, a challenge and an invitation wrapped together. Elena thought about her father's call, about Friday's dinner, about 12 years of silence and survival. "Your father knows?" "I told him once when I was 15. He said I was lying for attention. Locked me in my room for 3 days without food." The memory still burned. After that, I learned to stay quiet. Dominic's expression had gone dangerously blank. The same look he'd worn when she'd first mentioned the bruises. "How long has this been happening?" 12 years. And it's still happening? Elena nodded. The last time was the morning of our wedding. He cornered me in this bridal suite, said he wanted to give me a wedding present. Her hand moved unconsciously to her lower back. That's where the fresh bruise came from. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Dominic stood and walked to the windows, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. We're having dinner at his house Friday, Elena continued. My father arranged it. Victor always wants to remind me that I still belong to him, even married. No. The word was soft but absolute. Dominic turned to face her. You're not going. I don't have a choice. If I refuse, my father will— Your father, Dominic said coldly, can go to hell, and so can Victor Langston. You don't understand. Victor has leverage. He knows things about my father's business, about our family. If I anger him— If you anger him, what? He'll hurt you. Elena, he's already hurting you. He's been hurting you for 12 years while your father looked the other way and everyone else pretended not to notice. Dominic crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair, putting them at eye level. That ends now. You can't protect me from him. He's too powerful. I'm more powerful. There was no arrogance in the statement, just fact. And unlike your father, I don't make a habit of sacrificing women to protect my business interests. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. A wall she'd built so carefully over 12 years, beginning to crumble. Why do you care? Dominic's laugh was bitter. Because I'm not a complete monster, despite what my reputation suggests. Because you're my wife, which makes you my responsibility. Because— He stopped, jaw tightening. Because no one should have to live like this. If you go after Victor, it'll start a war. Then we'll have a war. People will die. People die every day in our world, Elena. The difference is whether they die for a reason that matters. Dominic stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, I'm making some calls. Dominic, this isn't a negotiation. You told me the truth. Now I'm acting on it. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I need names. Everyone who knew what Victor was doing and stayed silent. Everyone who helped him. Everyone who looked the other way. Elena's heart hammered. That's a long list. I have time. After he left, Elena sat in the dark, trembling with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning, Elena woke to find Dominic in the kitchen again, but this time he wasn't alone. 3 men sat at the island, hard-faced, dangerous-looking men who went quiet when she entered. Elena, Dominic said, this is James Kellerman, my attorney. Anthony Russo, Marco's brother and head of my intelligence division. And Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specializes in trauma cases. Elena froze in the doorway. What is this? This is me keeping my promise. Dominic gestured to an empty chair. Sit. We have work to do. James Kellerman was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had argued before judges and won. Mrs. Hale, I understand you've experienced systematic abuse from Victor Langston over a period of 12 years. Is that correct? Elena looked at Dominic, who nodded encouragement. Yes. I'll need detailed documentation, dates, locations, witnesses if any existed. Dr. Mitchell will help you with the psychological aspects, but I need the facts. For what purpose? To build a case, James said simply. Mr. Hale has instructed me to pursue every legal avenue available for holding Mr. Langston accountable. Anthony Russo spoke up, his voice rougher than his lawyer brother. We're also investigating Langston's business operations. A man who's comfortable abusing a child for 12 years probably has other secrets. We find those secrets. We find leverage. Elena sank into the offered chair, her mind reeling. You're serious? Completely, Dominic said. Victor Langston is a dead man walking. The only question is whether he dies legally or literally. Dominic, don't. His voice was sharp. Don't defend him. Don't make excuses. Don't tell me I'm overreacting. You've spent 12 years minimizing what he did to you. That ends today. Dr. Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward. Elena, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand something. What Victor did to you, it's not just abuse. Given your age when it started, we're talking about predatory behavior against a minor. That's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. The statute of limitations depends on the state and the specific crimes, but Illinois has eliminated the statute of limitations for many sex crimes against minors. If we can document what happened, we can prosecute. James pulled out a legal pad. Let's start with the first incident. You said you were 12? For the next 3 hours, Elena recounted 12 years of hell while a lawyer took notes, a psychologist asked gentle questions, and an intelligence officer compiled a list of potential witnesses. Dominic stayed throughout, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of memory. By the time they finished, Elena felt scraped raw, every old wound reopened and bleeding. That's enough for today, Dr. Mitchell said gently. Elena, I want to see you twice a week for therapy sessions. What you've been through, you need professional help processing it. I'm fine. You have nightmares every night, panic attacks during the day, and you've normalized abuse to the point where you think it's your fault. Dr. Mitchell's voice was firm. You're not fine, but you will be. I'll make sure of it. After the others left, Elena and Dominic sat alone in the kitchen. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in gold, but Elena felt cold down to her bones. I need to know something, she said quietly. Why are you doing this? Dominic was silent for a long moment. When I was 17, my father had an affair with one of our accountants, a young woman, 23, fresh out of college. My mother found out and made my father fire her. He stared into his coffee. 3 weeks later, the woman's body was found in the river. Suicide, the police said. But I knew better. Your mother had her killed to send a message to my father, to prove she could. Dominic's jaw tightened. I was 17, and I did nothing, didn't speak up, didn't investigate, didn't even ask questions. I stayed quiet because it was easier than challenging my parents. You were a kid. I was a coward. And that woman died because people like me, people with power, chose to look the other way rather than do the hard thing. He finally met Elena's eyes. I won't make that mistake again. Not with you. Not with anyone. Elena felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. Victor won't go quietly. I'm counting on it. Dominic's smile was sharp as a blade. Men like Langston think they're untouchable. I'm going to enjoy proving him wrong. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. James Kellerman filed preliminary legal documents. Anthony Russo's investigation team uncovered financial irregularities in Victor's businesses. Dr. Mitchell started Elena's therapy sessions, carefully unpacking 12 years of trauma. And Dominic made calls, to allies, to business partners, to people who owed him favors. Elena heard fragments of conversations through closed doors, Dominic's voice cold and certain as he explained the situation and asked for support. Some agreed immediately, others hesitated. A few refused outright, unwilling to go against Victor's influence. Dominic crossed their names off his list with permanent finality. Friday arrived too quickly. Elena stood in front of the bedroom mirror dressed in the outfit Mrs. Chen had laid out, a navy dress with long sleeves and a high neck that covered every bruise, every scar. Armor disguised as elegance. You don't have to do this, Dominic said from the doorway. He was dressed in a dark suit, looking every inch the dangerous man he was. We can cancel, tell your father you're sick. And prove to Victor that I'm afraid of him, that he still has power over me? Elena shook her head. No, I'm going, but I'm not going as a victim anymore. Dominic studied her for a moment, then nodded. Marco and 3 others will be with us. You stay within sight at all times. If Langston tries anything, you signal me immediately. How? He pulled a small device from his pocket, a bracelet made of silver links with a single red stone. Press the stone. It sends a silent alarm to my phone and Marco's. We'll extract you within seconds. Elena fastened the bracelet around her wrist. It felt like a lifeline. The drive to Victor's estate took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until they reached a gated property in Lake Forest. The house was massive, old money architecture with new money excess, all white columns and manicured lawns. Victor Langston stood on the front steps to greet them, distinguished in a gray suit, his silver hair catching the evening light. He looked like someone's beloved grandfather. the perfect disguise for a monster. Dominic! Elena! Welcome! Victor descended the steps with open arms, the gracious host. I'm so glad you could make it. Dominic's handshake was firm, professional. Thank you for the invitation. Elena, my dear, you look radiant. Victor moved to embrace her. Elena stepped back, positioning herself closer to Dominic. Thank you, Mr. Langston. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Surprise, irritation, quickly masked. Please, come in. Your father is already here, along with a few other guests. The interior was exactly what Elena had expected. Expensive art, antique furniture, a wine collection that probably cost more than most people's houses. A dozen guests mingled in the formal living room, the cream of Chicago's criminal elite mixed with enough legitimate business people to maintain appearances. Richard Whitmore stood near the fireplace, whiskey in hand, deep in conversation with a city councilman. He nodded acknowledgement to Elena, but didn't approach. Champagne? Victor offered, signaling a server. No, thank you, Elena said. I insist. It's a celebration, newlyweds in our midst. Victor took 2 glasses from the server's tray and offered one to Elena. She didn't take it. I'm not drinking tonight. Nonsense. 1 glass won't hurt. The lady said no. Dominic's voice was quiet, but carried enough steel to cut glass. I believe we should respect that. Victor's smile tightened. Of course. How rude of me to insist. He sipped his own champagne, eyes moving between Elena and Dominic with calculation. You know, Elena, you seem different. Marriage suits you. I'm exactly the same as I've always been. No, Victor said softly, stepping closer. You're not. There's something in your eyes that wasn't there before. Defiance, perhaps? Or have you forgotten your place? Her place, Dominic said, moving to Elena's side, is beside me, as my wife. I trust that's clear to everyone in this room. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Around them, conversations faltered as people tuned in to the suddenly tense exchange. Victor's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered beneath the surface. Crystal clear, though I do hope you'll allow me a private word with Elena before dinner. We have family business to discuss. No. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Dominic's hand settled on Elena's lower back, a possessive gesture that in any other circumstance might have bothered her, but right now felt like protection. My wife and I maintain no secrets. Anything you need to say to her, you can say to both of us. Victor's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the predator beneath. Dominic, I've known Elena since she was a child. Surely you can spare me 5 minutes. Not even 5 seconds. Dominic's voice dropped to something lethal. In fact, I think it's time we had a conversation, Victor, about boundaries, about respect, about what happens to men who forget both. The room had gone completely silent now. Elena's father moved toward them, alarm evident on his face. Dominic, perhaps we should stay out of this, Richard. Dominic didn't even look at him. This is between me and Langston. Victor set down his champagne glass with deliberate care. You're making a mistake, boy. I'm correcting one. See, I've been doing some research on you, Victor. Fascinating reading. Financial irregularities in your shipping company. Missing funds from the charity you run. And then there are the whispers. Young women who've worked for you over the years, who left suddenly, who won't talk about their time in your employment. Careful, Victor said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're treading on very dangerous ground. I'm just getting started. Dominic smiled, and it was terrifying. You see, I've made a career out of finding people's pressure points and applying force until something breaks. And you, Victor, you have a lot of pressure points. And all of you, every single person in this room, knew something was wrong and said nothing. The silence was deafening. Elena, Victor said carefully, you're clearly upset. Perhaps I should what? Go back to being the perfect victim? The quiet little bird who never complained, never fought back? Elena's voice was shaking but strong. I'm done with that. I'm done with all of you. Her father's face had gone purple. How dare you make such accusations? How dare I? Elena laughed, the sound brittle. How dare you sell me to save your business? How dare you look the other way while your partner tortured your daughter for 12 years? How dare you call yourself a father? Richard raised his hand. Whether to strike her or just gesture, Elena would never know. Because Dominic moved faster than thought, catching his wrist in an iron grip. "Touch her," Dominic said softly, "and I'll break every bone in your hand before I start on the rest of you." Marco and the other guards had materialized from the edges of the room, hands inside their jackets, eyes scanning for threats. Victor's own security moved in response, and suddenly the elegant dinner party had become an armed standoff. "Enough!" Victor's voice cracked like a whip. "Everyone stand down. This is still my home, and there will be no bloodshed under my roof." He turned to Dominic. "You've made your point. Take your wife and leave." "Gladly. But understand something, Langston. This isn't over. Not even close." Dominic released Richard's wrist and guided Elena toward the door, guards forming a protective circle around them. "You hurt her again. You even look at her wrong. And I will dismantle everything you've built, your businesses, your reputation, your life. That's not a threat. It's a guarantee." They were almost at the door when Victor spoke again. "You're declaring war over a woman who's not even worth the trouble, Dominic. That seems unwise." Dominic stopped, turned, and in his eyes was something that made grown men step back. "No," he said quietly, "I'm declaring war over a man who thought he could abuse a child and get away with it for 12 years. There's a difference, and you're about to learn what happens when someone finally calls you to account." Then they were outside, sirens wailing in the distance. Someone had called the police, probably. And Elena was in the car with Dominic, speeding away from Victor's estate and 12 years of silence. She started shaking and couldn't stop. Dominic pulled her against his chest, one arm around her shoulders, solid and warm and safe. "You did it," he murmured. "You stood up to him. You told the truth." "I'm so scared," Elena whispered. "I know. But you're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again." Elena buried her face in his shoulder and, for the first time in 12 years, believed that might actually be true. The fallout from Victor's dinner party hit like a Category 5 hurricane. By morning, Elena's phone had 63 missed calls. Her father, various family members, business associates, people she barely knew suddenly desperate to weigh in on her very public accusation. She turned off her phone and threw it in a drawer. Dominic's response was more direct. He called a meeting. The conference room in his downtown office was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, a table that could seat 20, walls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But the men gathered around that table weren't intimidated by expensive furniture. They were the heads of Chicago's most powerful crime families, and they'd seen worse things than art. Elena sat beside Dominic, the only woman in the room, feeling the weight of hostile stares. She'd been married to Dominic for less than 3 weeks, and now she was the reason their careful alliance was fracturing. "Let me make sure I understand," said Thomas Mercado, head of the South American drug pipeline. He was 50, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by anything. "You're asking us to turn against Victor Langston because he allegedly hurt your wife when she was younger?" "Not allegedly," Dominic said coldly. "Definitively. And not just hurt. Systematically abused for 12 years while her father and everyone else in our world looked the other way." "With respect," said Patrick O'Brien, the Irish arms dealer who controlled the docks. "What Victor does in his personal life isn't our concern. We have business arrangements with him, profitable ones." "Then I suggest you dissolve them," Dominic said, "because I'm bringing Victor down. The question is whether you're standing with me or in my way." The room erupted in arguments. Men shouted over each other, alliances shifted and reformed in real time, the careful balance of power that had kept Chicago's underworld functional threatening to collapse entirely. Anthony Russo appeared at Dominic's shoulder, sliding a folder across the table. "Before you decide," Anthony said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "you might want to see what we found." Dominic opened the folder and went very still. Then he slid it to Thomas Mercado, who read the first page and passed it on with an expression of disgust. Elena watched the folder make its way around the table, watched each man's face shift from skepticism to shock to barely controlled rage. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Proof," Dominic said, "that Victor's been running something far worse than we suspected." When the folder reached Patrick O'Brien, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping across marble. "This is verified?" "Every word," Anthony said. "Bank records, witness statements, physical evidence. Victor Langston has been operating a trafficking network for the past 8 years. Young women, some barely legal, some younger, brought in through his shipping company, distributed to clients across the country." The silence that followed was absolute. "How many?" asked Vincent Calabrese, the old-school Italian who controlled waste management and construction. "We've identified 43 victims so far," Anthony said. "That's just what we could document. The actual number is probably higher." Thomas Mercado's fist slammed down on the table. "That's 6, son of a bitch. He sat in my home, ate at my table, played with my daughter." "We all did business with him," Vincent said quietly. "Because he threatened to kill anyone I told. Because my own father called me a liar and locked me in my room for 3 days." Elena's voice didn't shake. She'd done her shaking in Dr. Mitchell's office. Now there was only cold, hard truth. Because in our world, men like Victor get away with anything as long as they're profitable. Vincent looked at Dominic. "What do you want from us?" "Support. When I move against Victor, I need to know you won't interfere. Better yet, I need you to cut ties publicly. Show him he's isolated. And if we refuse, then you're choosing to protect a man who traffics children. I'll remember that. And so will everyone else." Dominic's smile was sharp. "How do you think your family will react when they find out you knew about this and did nothing?" It was a threat wrapped in truth, and everyone in the room knew it. Thomas stood. "The Mercado family stands with you. Anyone who hurts kids deserves whatever's coming to them." One by one, the others followed. Patrick, Vincent. Even the cautious ones who'd initially balked. By the time the meeting ended, Victor Langston had lost every major alliance he'd built over 3 decades. "That was easier than I expected," Elena said after the room cleared. "They're not doing it for you," Dominic said bluntly. "They're doing it because Victor's activities could bring federal attention none of them can afford. Trafficking draws investigators, and investigators ask inconvenient questions." He closed the folder. "But their reasons don't matter. What matters is Victor's now a pariah. He won't take this lying down. I'm counting on it." Dominic was right. Victor's response came that same evening. Elena was in the library trying to read and failing to focus when Marco burst through the door with his weapon drawn. "We need to move you to the safe room, now." "What's happening?" 3 cars just breached the outer gate. Armed occupants. They're—" An explosion rocked the house, glass shattering somewhere on the first floor. "Move!" Marco grabbed Elena's arm and hauled her toward a panel in the wall that slid open to reveal a hidden staircase. They descended into a reinforced room beneath the house. Concrete walls, independent air supply, enough provisions to last a week. Through the security monitors, Elena watched chaos unfold above. Victor's men, at least a dozen of them, swarmed the property. Gunfire echoed. Dominic's guards responded with precision, using the house's architecture for cover, driving the attackers back toward the perimeter. Then Dominic appeared on the monitors, moving through the firefight with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before. He took down 2 men with quick, brutal shots, then spoke into his radio. "Fall back to secondary positions. Let them think they're winning." "What's he doing?" Elena asked. Marco's smile was grim. "Giving them enough rope to hang themselves." Victor's men pushed deeper into the house, convinced they were gaining ground. What they didn't realize was that Dominic's forces were herding them exactly where he wanted them, into the east wing, where every exit could be sealed remotely. Dominic's voice came through the security speakers. "Seal it." Steel shutters slammed down over windows and doors. Victor's men found themselves trapped in a kill box with nowhere to run. "You have 1 chance to surrender," Dominic's voice echoed through the house's intercom. "Throw down your weapons and walk out with your hands up. You'll live to see tomorrow. Refuse and you won't." The silence stretched. Then one by one, weapons clattered to the floor. Dominic's men moved in, zip-tying hands, collecting weapons, securing prisoners. Within 20 minutes, the assault was over. Marco received confirmation through his earpiece. "All clear. 12 hostiles in custody. 2 of ours injured. Non-critical." When Elena emerged from the safe room, the mansion looked like a war zone. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Glass covered the marble floors. Blood stained the antique rug in the foyer. Dominic stood in the middle of it all, suit jacket discarded, shoulder holster visible, a cut above his left eye bleeding sluggishly. He was on the phone, his voice cold and precise. I don't care what it costs. I want every property Victor owns under surveillance by morning. Bank accounts frozen. Business partners contacted and convinced to sever ties. Yes, convinced. Use whatever means necessary. He paused, listening. No, I want him alive. For now. He ended the call and finally looked at Elena. Are you hurt? I'm fine. You're bleeding. It's nothing. He touched the cut absently. Victor made his move. Now I make mine. What are you going to do? Show him what happens when you come after what's mine. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in systematic destruction. Dominic didn't just attack Victor's business interests, he obliterated them. The shipping company that had been Victor's primary income source suddenly faced federal investigation for customs violations. His charity was audited and found to be siphoning funds. His real estate holdings were tied up in lawsuits. His political connections received anonymous packages containing detailed evidence of their association with a trafficker. Anthony Russo's intelligence team worked around the clock, digging up every piece of dirt they could find. They discovered offshore accounts, shell companies, a web of corruption that went deeper than anyone had suspected. And they found the women. Not all of them. Many had disappeared completely, lost to the network Victor had built. But they found enough. Women who'd been trafficked through his operation, women who'd escaped, women who'd been too terrified to come forward until someone finally offered them protection. Dr. Mitchell coordinated their care, connecting them with therapists, lawyers, safe houses. James Kellerman built case after case, documenting everything with the meticulous precision of someone who knew they were building toward something historic. Elena spent those 48 hours in a strange state of suspension, watching the machine Dominic had built dismantle a man who'd seemed untouchable, feeling simultaneously empowered and terrified. On the third day, her father called. Elena stared at the phone, then answered. Hello, Father? You need to stop this. Richard Whitmore's voice was strained. Elena, I know you're angry, but you're destroying everything. Victor's threatening to release information about my business dealings. Let him. You don't understand what you're saying. If that information becomes public, I'll lose everything. The company, the house, my reputation. You should have thought of that before you let him hurt me for 12 years. Elena's voice was steady. You chose your business over your daughter. Now you get to live with that choice. Elena, please. I'm your father. You stopped being my father when you called me a liar and locked me in my room. When you stood by while Victor... Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. You don't get to ask me for mercy. You don't get to pretend you deserve it. Victor will kill me if I don't deliver you to him. He's demanding to see you alone or he'll... Then I suggest you refuse. Because I'm not his property anymore. I'm not yours either. And if you so much as try to use me to save yourself, I'll make sure every newspaper in Chicago knows exactly what kind of man you are. She hung up before he could respond. Dominic found her an hour later, sitting in the garden despite the October cold, wrapped in a blanket that Marco had insisted she take. Your father's reaching out to my contacts, Dominic said, settling onto the bench beside her, trying to find someone who will pressure me into calling this off. Will anyone help him? No. I've made it very clear that anyone who sides with Langston or Whitmore becomes my enemy. Most people in our world aren't stupid enough to make that trade. He studied her profile. Are you all right? I don't know what I am, Elena admitted. For 12 years, I thought if I just stayed quiet, kept my head down, survived, eventually it would be over. But it was never going to be over. Victor would have just kept taking and taking until there was nothing left of me. And now I'm angry, angrier than I've ever been, at Victor, at my father, at everyone who knew and did nothing. She turned to look at Dominic. At myself, for taking so long to fight back. You were a child. None of this was your fault. I know that. Dr. Mitchell's made sure I understand that, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. Elena pulled the blanket tighter. What happens now? Now we finish this. Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled grimly. Victor's trying to flee the country. Anthony's team tracked him booking a private flight to Argentina. Are you going to stop him? Already done. Every airport within 500 miles has his photo. Border Patrol's been alerted. He's trapped in Chicago with nowhere to run and no one to help him. Dominic stood, offering her his hand. Come on, there's something you need to see. He led her inside to his office, where multiple monitors displayed surveillance feeds. One showed Victor's estate, empty now, the gates bearing foreclosure notices. Another showed his downtown office building, also closed, federal agents carrying out boxes of evidence. We've seized everything, Dominic explained. His assets, his properties, his records. James is turning it all over to the FBI. By tomorrow, there will be federal indictments for trafficking, money laundering, fraud, and about 15 other charges. He'll fight it, hire expensive lawyers, drag it out for years. Normally, yes, but I've made sure the evidence is overwhelming, and I've convinced several of his victims to testify. Dominic pulled up another file, including someone you know. Elena looked at the screen and felt her breath catch. The woman in the photo was young, maybe 20, with dark hair and frightened eyes that looked familiar. Maria Castellano, Dominic said. She worked for Victor 3 years ago. Thought she was interviewing for a legitimate secretary position. Instead, he kept her prisoner for 8 months. I remember her, Elena whispered. She came to dinner at my father's house once. She looked so scared, and I didn't help her. I saw what was happening, and I did nothing. You were barely 21, still trapped yourself. You couldn't have saved her. I could have tried. Well, now you can. Dominic closed the file. Maria's agreed to testify, but she's terrified. She needs to know she's not alone. I thought maybe, if you were willing, you could talk to her, show her that survivors can fight back. Elena looked at the photo again, at those frightened eyes that mirrored her own for so many years. Set up a meeting. I'll talk to her. The meeting happened 2 days later in a safe house Anthony's team had secured. Maria sat on a worn couch, picking at her nails, radiating anxiety. When Elena walked in, the younger woman looked up with a mixture of recognition and hope. You're Elena Whitmore, Maria said. I saw you at that dinner. You looked like you understood. I did. Elena sat across from her, careful to maintain distance. Victor hurt me too, for 12 years. Maria's eyes widened. 12 years? But you were his partner's daughter. How did no one... Because people see what they want to see. And powerful men like Victor are very good at hiding what they don't want seen. Elena leaned forward. But he can't hide anymore. We're making sure of that. I'm so scared, Maria whispered. If I testify, if I tell people what he did, my family will know. Everyone will know. And what if he finds a way to hurt me again? He won't. Dominic Hale has made sure of that. Victor's isolated, his resources are frozen, his allies have abandoned him. He's a dead man walking. Elena reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and took Maria's hand. You're not alone. I'll be testifying too. So will others. We're going to stand up in court and tell the truth, and Victor is going to pay for every single thing he did. You're really going to testify even though everyone will know? Everyone already knows. I told them at Victor's own dinner party in front of half of Chicago's elite. And you know what? I'm not ashamed anymore. He should be ashamed. Everyone who protected him should be ashamed, but not us. Never us. Maria's grip tightened. Okay. I'll do it. I'll testify. Over the next week, 4 more women came forward. Each one had a story that made Elena's blood boil. Manipulation, coercion, violence. Victor had been a predator for decades, and the full scope of his crimes was only now becoming clear. James Kellerman worked with federal prosecutors to build an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records proving Victor had profited from trafficking, witness testimony detailing his crimes, physical evidence that made denial impossible. But Victor still had one card to play. Elena was in a therapy session with Dr. Mitchell when Marco burst in, his expression grim. We have a situation. Victor's issued a statement through his lawyer. He's claiming everything is a conspiracy, that you and Dominic fabricated evidence to destroy him because of a business dispute. Let him claim whatever he wants, Elena said. The evidence speaks for itself. There's more. Marco hesitated. He's threatening to release information about your father's criminal activities unless you recant your testimony. I don't care what he releases. Elena, doctor. Mitchell said gently, your father may be facing serious legal consequences if this information becomes public. Good. He deserves them. Elena stood. Is there anything else? Marco exchanged glances with Dr. Mitchell. Victor's demanding to meet with you, alone. He says if you don't agree, he'll hurt the other women who've agreed to testify. The words hung in the air like a grenade. It's a bluff, Elena said, but her voice wavered. He doesn't have access to them. They're all in protective custody. Probably, but we can't be certain. He may have resources we don't know about. Marco's jaw tightened. Mr. Hale says absolutely not. He's refused on your behalf. What if it's not a bluff? What if Victor really can hurt them? Elena felt panic rising. I can't let him hurt anyone else because of me. It's not because of you, Dr. Mitchell interrupted firmly. It's because of him, because he's a predator who's finally being held accountable. Don't let him manipulate you into thinking you're responsible for his actions. Elena knew Dr. Mitchell was right. Intellectually, she understood that Victor's threats were just another form of control, another attempt to make her compliant and silent. But 12 years of conditioning didn't disappear in 3 weeks. She excused herself and went to find Dominic. He was in his office, on the phone with someone, but he ended the call when he saw her face. Marco told you, he said flatly. Victor wants to meet. What if he's serious about hurting the other women? He's not. Anthony's verified that all of them are secure. Victor's grasping at straws. Dominic came around the desk. Elena, you are not meeting with him. I don't care what he threatens. The answer is no. But no. Dominic's voice was absolute. You spent 12 years giving him what he wanted because you thought it would keep you safe. It didn't work. It never works with men like him. The only thing that works is removing their power completely. I know that. I do, but Elena's voice broke. What if I'm wrong? What if someone gets hurt because I refused? Then it's Victor's fault, not yours. He pulls the trigger, metaphorically or literally, not you. Dominic's expression softened slightly. I understand the guilt. I understand the fear. But you need to trust me on this. Meeting with him would be a mistake. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle it, that she was strong enough now. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. Victor had controlled her for so long that the idea of facing him alone, even now, terrified her. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, no meeting. Good. Dominic pulled her into an unexpected embrace. Brief, careful, but solid. We're going to end this. Soon. I promise. 2 days later, everything changed. Elena woke to Marco pounding on her bedroom door, shouting her name with an urgency that sent ice through her veins. What's wrong? She called, grabbing a robe. Turn on the news. Channel 7. Now! Elena fumbled for the remote, turning on the television. The morning news showed aerial footage of a warehouse on the south side, police cars and federal vehicles surrounding it. Breaking news this morning as federal agents raid a property owned by businessman Victor Langston. Sources say they've discovered evidence of human trafficking, with multiple victims found inside. The camera cut to a reporter on the ground. We're receiving reports that at least 6 women were recovered from this location, all showing signs of prolonged captivity. FBI officials are calling this one of the largest trafficking busts in Chicago history. Elena's phone rang. Dominic. Are you watching? He asked without preamble. Yes. What happened? Anthony's team found the warehouse 2 days ago, but waited to move until we had enough evidence for federal charges. They raided it at dawn, found 6 women Victor was holding, some of them there for months. Dominic's voice was tight with controlled rage. Elena, one of them was only 15. The room spun. Elena sat down hard on the bed. 15. We have him. The FBI has Victor in custody. He's facing federal trafficking charges, state charges. Everything we've built plus everything they found in that warehouse. There's no walking away from this. No bail. No deals. It's really over? Not yet. But we're close. The arrest dominated the news cycle for days. Chicago's elite scrambled to distance themselves from Victor, suddenly remembering suspicious behavior they'd overlooked, red flags they'd ignored. Her father issued a statement through his lawyer, claiming he'd had no knowledge of Victor's criminal activities, a lie so transparent it fooled no one. The trial was set for 3 months later, expedited because of the severity of the charges and the federal government's interest in making an example. But Victor had one final move to make. On a cold November morning, Elena received a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Hello, little bird." Victor's voice sent ice through her veins. "How are you calling me? You're in custody." Lawyers can be very creative. I have 5 minutes before they realize I'm using a phone I shouldn't have. Victor's tone was almost pleasant, like they were discussing the weather. "I wanted to tell you how impressed I am. You've grown a spine, married well, destroyed my life quite thoroughly." "You destroyed your own life." "Perhaps, but you helped." He paused. "I'm going to prison, Elena." "That's inevitable now. But I want you to know something. I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never feel safe. I have friends in places you can't imagine, people who owe me favors. And one day, when you've finally relaxed, when you think you've won, they'll remind you that I never forget." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. 3 weeks ago, those words would have destroyed her, would have sent her spiraling into panic and fear. But 3 weeks ago, she hadn't stood in front of Chicago's elite and named her abuser, hadn't watched that abuser lose everything, hadn't found her voice after 12 years of silence. "You're pathetic," she said clearly. "A small, broken man who hurt people weaker than him because it was the only way you could feel powerful, and now you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage with men who hate predators even more than I do. I hope you suffer, Victor. I hope every single day is agony, and I hope you die knowing that I won." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system, but underneath the fear was something new, satisfaction. She'd faced him, not in person, but close enough, and she hadn't crumbled. When she told Dominic about the call, his response was swift and absolute. He had Anthony trace the number, identify everyone who'd helped Victor make the call, and ensure they all faced consequences. Within 24 hours, 2 corrupt guards had been fired and charged with facilitating criminal communication. "He won't be able to contact you again," Dominic said. "I've made sure of it." "Even if he does," Elena said quietly, "I'm not afraid of him anymore. Not like I was." Dominic studied her for a long moment. "No, you're not. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for." "I'm stronger than I gave me credit for." The trial began on a gray January morning, the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and protesters. Elena walked through the gauntlet with Dominic at her side, Maria and the other survivors behind them, a wall of guards ensuring their safety. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Elena took the stand on the 3rd day, swore to tell the truth, and did exactly that. Victor's lawyer tried to paint her as a scorned woman seeking revenge, but James Kellerman shredded that narrative with evidence. Therapy records from when she was 15, showing clear signs of abuse that her father had ignored. Testimony from household staff who'd witnessed Victor's violence. Phone records proving he'd contacted her obsessively even after her marriage. When Maria took the stand and told her story, kept prisoner for 8 months, used and discarded like trash, 3 jurors were openly crying. The 15-year-old girl they'd found in the warehouse testified via video link, her face obscured, her voice small but steady, as she described being promised a modeling career and instead finding hell. Victor sat through it all with the blank expression of a man who'd already accepted his fate. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later, but everyone knew what the outcome would be. Federal trafficking charges alone carried a minimum of 15 years. Combined with everything else, Victor Langston would die in prison. Elena stood outside the courthouse, breathing in cold January air, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years, freedom. "How do you feel?" Dominic asked. "Like I can finally breathe," Elena said. Then she turned and walked straight into his arms, letting him hold her while she cried tears of relief and rage and victory all mixed together. Around them, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but Elena didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be. The sentencing hearing took place on a Wednesday morning that felt more like the ending of a war than a legal proceeding. Elena sat in the front row beside Dominic, her hand clasped tightly in his. Maria was there, along with 3 other survivors who'd found the courage to face their abuser one final time. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during the trial. The media circus had died down, leaving only those who truly needed to witness this moment. Victor was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair disheveled, his distinguished appearance crumbling under the weight of his conviction. He'd aged a decade in the 3 weeks since the verdict, the invincible businessman replaced by a broken man facing the consequences of 30 years of cruelty. Judge Morrison was a severe woman in her 60s who'd spent 40 years on the bench and had no patience for predators. She reviewed the sentencing guidelines with clinical precision, then looked at Victor with open disgust. "Mr. Langston, in my 4 decades as a judge, I have encountered few defendants whose crimes were as systematic, as calculated, and as utterly devoid of humanity as yours. You preyed on the vulnerable, you destroyed lives, you operated a trafficking network that treated human beings as commodities." She paused, letting the words settle. "The prosecution has recommended 45 years. I find that insufficient." Victor's lawyer started to object, but Judge Morrison cut him off with a look. "You will receive 60 years in federal prison without possibility of parole on the trafficking charges alone. An additional 20 years for the assault and abuse charges to run consecutively. You are also ordered to pay $15 million in restitution to your victims." Judge Morrison's gavel came down like a guillotine. "You will die in prison, Mr. Langston, and that is far more mercy than you showed any of the women whose lives you destroyed." 80 years. Victor would be 133 when his sentence ended, a mathematical impossibility that made the life sentence clear. Elena watched him being led away, watched him shuffle toward the door in chains, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. No pity, no forgiveness, just the certainty that he would never hurt anyone again. Outside, the survivors gathered on the courthouse steps. Maria hugged Elena tightly, both of them crying, while reporters kept a respectful distance that Dominic's glare ensured they maintained. "Thank you," Maria whispered, "for being brave enough to go first. I couldn't have done this without you." "You were brave all on your own," Elena said. "You survived. That took more strength than anything I did." They stood together for a moment, a circle of women who'd endured hell and come out the other side. Not unscathed. Elena knew they'd all carry scars for the rest of their lives, but alive, free, victorious. The celebration, such as it was, happened back at the mansion. Dr. Mitchell had organized a small gathering, just the survivors, a few trusted allies, and Dominic's core team. Mrs. Chen prepared food that no one really ate, too wired on adrenaline and relief to have much appetite. Elena found herself on the terrace, staring out at the snow-covered garden, processing what had just happened. Victor Langston, the monster who'd controlled her life for 12 years, was gone. Locked away in a maximum security prison where he'd spend whatever remained of his life surrounded by other predators, all of them circling like sharks. She wondered if he'd find the same terror there that he'd inflicted on others. She hoped so. "You're thinking too hard," Dominic said, stepping onto the terrace with 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered her one. Elena took it, though she rarely drank. "I'm thinking about what happens now. Now you heal, properly, without constantly looking over your shoulder." "And my father?" Richard Whitmore had been notably absent from the trial, his lawyers managing to keep him from being charged, despite clear evidence he'd known about Victor's crimes. The statute of limitations and careful legal maneuvering had saved him from prison, but not from public disgrace. Federal investigators seized most of his assets. He's facing civil suits from several of Victor's victims. His business contacts have abandoned him. He's effectively finished. Dominic sipped his whiskey. "Not the justice you wanted, maybe, but justice nonetheless." Elena considered that. Her father would live, but he'd live in shame. His empire crumbled, his name synonymous with the man who'd protected a monster for profit. It wasn't prison, but it was permanent exile from the world he'd valued above everything, including his daughter. "I can accept that," she said quietly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow begin to fall. Elena realized with a start that this was the first time she'd been alone with Dominic without tension coiling in her stomach, without fear making her hyper-aware of every movement. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked. "That I'm not afraid of you anymore." He turned to look at her, surprise evident. "You were afraid of me." Terrified. "You're powerful, dangerous. You could destroy me with a word." "Of course I was afraid." Elena met his eyes. "But you've had 100 opportunities to hurt me, and instead you've protected me, fought for me, given me the space to heal." She paused. "Why?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what I told you about the woman my mother had killed? The accountant?" "Yes." "I was 17, and I convinced myself there was nothing I could have done, that it wasn't my responsibility, that I was just a kid, that the world was cruel and people died, and that was just how things worked." He stared into his glass. "I carried that guilt for 15 years. And when you walked into my life, when I saw those bruises, heard that fear in your voice, I had a choice. I could look away like I did before, or I could actually do something. So this was about your guilt?" "At first, maybe. But it stopped being about me pretty quickly." Dominic's voice softened. "You're strong, Elena. Stronger than you know. You survived 12 years of hell and came out with your humanity intact. That's extraordinary. And I wanted to make sure that strength got the chance to flourish instead of being crushed." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "I'm glad I married you. That makes one of us," Dominic said wryly. "You deserve better than an arranged marriage to a crime boss." "Maybe, but you're the crime boss who saw me when I was invisible, who believed me when I told the truth, who went to war for me." Elena stepped closer. "That matters more than romance, or choice, or any of the things fairy tales promise." Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, not obligation, something warmer, more complex, more real. "Elena," he started, but whatever he was going to say was interrupted by Marco appearing in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." The warmth evaporated, replaced by cold alertness. "What kind of situation?" Dominic asked. "Victor made a call from prison. We just intercepted it. He contacted someone. We're still identifying who, but the conversation suggests he's planning something." Marco's expression was grim. "He may have arranged a hit." "On who?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "You, ma'am." The world tilted slightly. Elena gripped the terrace railing. "He's in maximum security. How?" "Prison doesn't mean powerless, not for someone like Victor. He's spent 30 years building connections, calling in favors. He still has resources." Dominic was already moving toward the door, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "Marco, full lockdown. Triple the guard rotation. I want eyes on every entrance, every approach. Elena doesn't leave the property until we've identified the threat." "Already done, sir." They spent the next 3 days in lockdown while Anthony's team worked to trace Victor's call and identify the threat. Elena found herself back in familiar territory, confined to the mansion, guards at every door, freedom curtailed by someone else's violence. But this time, she wasn't alone in her cage. Dominic stayed close, working from home instead of the office, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. They fell into an unexpected routine: breakfast together, work in separate rooms, dinner where they actually talked instead of maintaining polite distance. On the fourth day, Anthony Russo arrived with information. They gathered in Dominic's office, Dominic behind his desk, Elena in one of the chairs, Anthony standing with the tense energy of someone delivering bad news. "We identified the contact," Anthony said without preamble. "Derek Walsh, low-level enforcer, works freelance, specializes in making problems disappear. Victor hired him before his arrest, paid half up front with the rest contingent on completion." "Completion of what?" Elena asked, though her stomach already knew. "Killing you, making it look like an accident." Anthony pulled up a photo on his tablet, a hard-faced man in his 40s with cold eyes and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "We've been tracking him for 3 days. He's good, careful, but we found him." "Where is he?" Dominic's voice was deadly quiet. "In custody, Chicago PD picked him up an hour ago on weapons charges. We gave them enough evidence to hold him indefinitely. Anthony hesitated. But there's a complication. Of course there is, Dominic muttered. Walsh didn't work alone. Victor hired a team. Walsh was just the primary. We've identified 2 other contractors, but there may be more we haven't found yet. Anthony looked at Elena. Until we're certain we've neutralized every threat, you're still in danger. Elena felt the walls closing in. So I'm supposed to just hide here indefinitely? Let Victor control my life from prison? Elena? Dominic started. No. She stood, anger burning through the fear. I didn't survive 12 years of abuse, didn't testify in court, didn't watch that bastard get sentenced to 80 years, just to let him trap me again. There has to be another way. The other way is eliminating the threat at its source, Dominic said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. You mean Victor, Elena said. I mean Victor. He's in maximum security federal prison. You can't just... She stopped, looking between Dominic and Anthony. Can you? Men die in prison every day, Anthony said pragmatically. Heart attacks. Fights gone wrong. Accidents in the yard. Victor's made enemies. Other inmates who don't like predators. Guards who've been properly motivated. Fellow criminals who see opportunity in his downfall. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about solving a problem. Dominic's expression was carved from stone. Victor won't stop, Elena. As long as he's alive, he'll keep reaching for you. Keep trying to hurt you. Keep proving that even from behind bars, he has power. So we prove he doesn't, Elena said. We show him that his threats are meaningless, that I'm not afraid anymore, that he's lost. That's noble. It's also naive. Dominic stood, coming around the desk. This isn't about courage or strength. It's about reality. Victor has resources we're still discovering, connections that run deep. Until he's dead, you'll never be completely safe. Elena knew he was right. Logically, she understood that Victor alive was Victor dangerous, no matter how thick the prison walls. But the thought of ordering someone's death, even someone who deserved it, made her stomach turn. I need time to think, she said. You don't have much of it. Anthony pulled up another file. We intercepted another communication. Victor's getting desperate. He's offering $250,000 to anyone who can get to you. That kind of money attracts attention from people we can't necessarily track or stop. $250,000. Her life reduced to a number, a bounty, a prize for whoever was ruthless enough to claim it. Elena looked at Dominic, saw the barely controlled rage in his eyes, the protective fury that had been building since the day he'd first noticed her bruises. She thought about everything he'd done for her, the safety he'd provided, the justice he'd fought for, the space he'd given her to heal. If Victor dies in prison, she said slowly, there's no coming back from that. No pretending we're not exactly what the world says we are. I stopped pretending years ago, Dominic said. The question is whether you can accept what I'm willing to do to protect you. It was a test, Elena realized, not of her courage or her morality, but of whether she could truly accept the man she'd married. Not the version who'd shown her kindness, but the version who ruled Chicago's underworld with calculated violence. Do it, she said. End this, permanently. Dominic studied her for a long moment, searching for hesitation. When he found none, he nodded to Anthony. Make it clean. Make it look natural. And make absolutely certain there's no blowback. Consider it done, Anthony said, and left to make arrangements for a murder that would never officially be called that. After he was gone, Elena and Dominic stood in heavy silence. Are you all right? He asked. I just ordered a man's death. I should feel something, guilt, horror, shame, but I don't. I feel... She struggled to name the emotion. Relieved. Is that wrong? It's honest. Dominic moved closer, carefully telegraphing his approach like he always did. Victor forfeited his right to mercy when he started hurting children. What happens to him now is justice, whether the law calls it that or not. You've done this before, ordered deaths. Many times. Does it get easier? No, it gets more necessary. He touched her face gently, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. But I've never had a reason that mattered as much as this one. The intensity in his gaze made Elena's breath catch. Something had shifted between them over the past months. the transactional arrangement evolving into something neither of them had planned for. Dominic, she started, but he was already pulling back, putting professional distance between them again. You should get some rest. This will be over soon, and then you can finally start living without fear. He left before she could respond, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the knowledge that somewhere in Chicago, plans were being made to end Victor Langston's life. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the library, reading and rereading the same page without comprehension, waiting for word that would confirm her transformation from victim to something else entirely. The call came at 4 in the morning. Elena heard Dominic's phone ring in his study, heard his low voice answering, heard the brief conversation that lasted less than a minute. Then his footsteps in the hallway, heading toward the library. He appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights, his expression unreadable. It's done, he said simply. Victor had a heart attack in his cell. The guards found him an hour ago. He was pronounced dead at the prison medical facility at 3:47. Elena set down her book with hands that barely trembled. How do you feel? The question surprised him. How do I... Elena, this isn't about me. You just killed a man. For me. I think it's very much about you. She stood, crossing to where he stood. So I'm asking, how do you feel? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Satisfied. He hurt you for 12 years. He tried to kill you from prison. He deserved worse than a quick death. He met her eyes. I'd do it again without hesitation. I know you would. That's what makes you dangerous. Elena reached up and cupped his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. And it's what kept me alive. Elena, stop pulling away from me. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. You've been doing it for weeks. Every time we get close, every time something real happens between us, you retreat. Why? Because this was supposed to be a business arrangement. Because you married me out of obligation, not choice. Because you deserve better than a man who solves problems with violence. Dominic's voice was rough. Because I'm falling in love with you, and that wasn't part of the deal. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Elena felt her heart hammering, felt the familiar panic rising, but this time it wasn't fear of harm. It was fear of hope, of possibility, of something good that might actually be real. I didn't choose to marry you, she said slowly. But I'm choosing to stay, not because of obligation or duty or fear, because you see me. The broken parts, the scared parts, the angry parts, all of it, and you've never once asked me to be anything other than exactly what I am. Elena, I'm not done. She stepped closer, eliminating the distance he kept trying to maintain. I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. I don't have a healthy reference point. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like maybe I'm allowed to want things instead of just surviving them. She took his hand, pressed it against her racing heart. So if that's love or something close to it, then yes. I'm falling too. Dominic stared at her for a heartbeat, 2, 3. Then he was kissing her, gentle at first, giving her every opportunity to pull away, then deeper when she leaned into him instead. It was nothing like the perfunctory kiss at their wedding. This was real, messy, perfect in its imperfection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly. Give you the choice you never had. You just had a man killed to protect me. I think we're past conventional courtship. Elena smiled despite everything. But I appreciate the sentiment. I'm serious. No more hiding in separate rooms. No more pretending this is just business. I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I want to build something real with you, if you'll let me. Elena thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The arranged marriage, the abuse revealed, the war fought, the monster slain. None of it was romantic. None of it was what fairy tales promised, but it was real, and it was theirs. Yes, she said simply. Let's build something real. They stood together in the pre-dawn darkness, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new from the ruins. Outside, Chicago woke to news of Victor Langston's death. Natural causes, the report said, a heart attack brought on by stress and age. The media ran brief obituaries that carefully avoided mentioning his crimes. His family arranged a small private funeral that Elena didn't attend. She was done giving Victor Langston any more of her time. Instead, she spent the next weeks actually living, attending therapy sessions that began healing 12 years of trauma, reconnecting with the survivors who'd testified alongside her, learning what it meant to exist without constant fear. And she spent time with Dominic, discovering the man behind the reputation. He was surprisingly domestic, cooking elaborate meals when Mrs. Chen had her days off. He had a dry sense of humor that caught Elena off guard. He read voraciously, philosophy, history, classic literature, and could debate the morality of the prince while planning criminal enterprises without seeing any contradiction. He was also patient beyond measure, never pushing for more than Elena was ready to give, letting her set the pace as they navigated from arranged marriage towards something resembling real partnership. "I have something for you," Dominic said one evening in March, 3 months after Victor's death. They were in the library, Elena's favorite room in the house, surrounded by books and firelight. Dominic handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $15 million. This is the restitution from Victor's estate." Elena stared at the amount, her mind struggling to process. "This is too much money." "It's what the court ordered. Victor's assets were liquidated, divided among his victims. This is your share." Dominic sat beside her. "You can do whatever you want with it. Save it, spend it, burn it in the fireplace. It's yours." Elena thought about what $15 million meant. Security, freedom, independence, everything she'd never had. "I want to use it to help others," she said slowly. "Other survivors. Women trying to escape abuse, trying to rebuild their lives. I want to create something that gives them the support I never had." Dominic smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. "I think that's perfect. What did you have in mind?" They spent the next hour planning, Elena's ideas flowing freely as Dominic helped shape them into something actionable. A foundation, safe houses, legal support, therapy services, job training, everything a survivor might need to truly escape and rebuild. "We'll call it the Elena Hale Foundation," Dominic suggested. "No, not my name." Elena shook her head. "Something that represents what it is. Something that gives hope." They settled on the Phoenix Foundation, rising from ashes, transformation, rebirth. It felt right. Over the next months, Elena threw herself into building something meaningful from her pain. She worked with lawyers to establish the foundation's structure, with Dr. Mitchell to develop support programs, with Maria and the other survivors to ensure the services actually met the needs of people who'd lived through trauma. Dominic supported it all, financially, logistically, using his connections to secure properties and resources, making sure Elena had everything she needed to turn her vision into reality. The foundation officially launched in September, 8 months after Victor's death. The opening ceremony was small, intimate, just the core team, some early participants, and a few carefully selected media outlets to spread the word. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd, and felt a moment of surreal displacement. A year ago, she'd been a ghost in her own life, invisible and voiceless. Now she was creating something that would outlast her, that would help thousands of women find the freedom she'd fought so hard to claim. "The Phoenix Foundation exists because silence protects abusers," Elena said, her voice steady and strong. "Because too many people look away instead of helping. Because survivors deserve more than just escape. They deserve the chance to rebuild, to thrive, to reclaim the lives that were stolen from them." She paused, letting the words settle. "This foundation is proof that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning." The applause was genuine, warm. Dominic stood in the back, pride evident in his expression, and Elena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of purpose, of meaning, of having transformed pain into something that actually mattered. After the ceremony, as volunteers and participants mingled, Maria approached Elena with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Maria said, pulling Elena into a hug. "For this, for everything, for showing us that we could fight back." "You fought back all on your own," Elena said. "I just made sure you weren't fighting alone." Later, after everyone had left and the building was quiet, Elena and Dominic stood in what would become the main counseling center, a warm, welcoming space designed to feel safe rather than institutional. You did something extraordinary today, Dominic said. We did something extraordinary, Elena corrected. None of this would exist without you. I just provided resources. You provided the vision, the courage, the refusal to let your pain be meaningless. He pulled her close, and Elena went willingly, fitting against him like she'd been designed to be there. I'm proud of you. Elena rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady, solid, real. A year ago, I was terrified of you. Now I can't imagine my life without you. A year ago, I thought I was incapable of caring about anything beyond power and survival. You proved me wrong. Dominic kissed the top of her head. Thank you for that. They stood together in the space they'd built from tragedy, two people who'd found each other in darkness and created something that brought light to others. The Phoenix Foundation would go on to help hundreds of survivors. But its first success story was the woman who'd founded it, a girl who'd been invisible for 12 years, who'd found her voice and used it to change the world. And beside her, always, was the man who'd gone to war to protect her, who'd killed to keep her safe, who'd loved her enough to let her become exactly who she was meant to be. Together, they proved that real power wasn't control. It was choosing to protect what mattered without breaking it in the process. The Phoenix Foundation's first anniversary arrived with spring rain and unexpected complications. Elena stood in the conference room, reviewing applications from women seeking help, when Dr. Mitchell appeared with a troubled expression. We have a situation, Dr. Mitchell said, closing the door behind her. One of our participants, Jessica Chen, 22, her ex-boyfriend found out where she's staying. He's been calling, leaving messages, threatening to come after her. Elena's jaw tightened. Where is she now? Safe house number 3. Marco's team is already on site, but she's terrified. She wants to leave the program, thinks she's putting everyone at risk. Absolutely not. We don't abandon people because threats get difficult. Elena was already reaching for her phone. I'll talk to her. 20 minutes later, Elena sat across from Jessica in a small, secure room at the safe house. The younger woman was painfully thin, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling as she twisted a tissue into shreds. I'm so sorry, Jessica whispered. I didn't mean to bring trouble here. Maybe I should just... If I go back to him, he'll stop threatening everyone else. Stop. Elena's voice was firm but gentle. That's your fear talking. That's what abusers count on, making you believe that their violence is somehow your responsibility. It's not. But he said he'll hurt people. He said, if I don't come home, he'll... Jessica's voice broke. He's lying. Men like him always lie. They threaten and manipulate because actual power requires them to face consequences, and they're too cowardly for that. Elena leaned forward. I know it's terrifying. I lived in that fear for 12 years, but running back to your abuser doesn't make you safe. It just gives him more time to hurt you. You really understand, Jessica said, something like hope flickering in her eyes. I really do. And I'm telling you that you're not alone. We have security, legal resources, people who will stand between you and him, but you have to trust us. Elena took Jessica's shaking hands. Can you do that? Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. Elena stayed until the younger woman had calmed, until Dr. Mitchell arrived to continue the session. As she left, Marco fell into step beside her. We identified the ex-boyfriend, Ryan Gallagher, 28, history of domestic violence, 2 prior arrests. Marco handed her a file. Mr. Hale wants to handle this personally. Of course he does. Elena smiled despite the situation. In the year since Victor's death, Dominic had become personally invested in the Foundation's work, treating every threat against their participants as a threat against his own family. She found him in his office at the mansion, on the phone with what sounded like a judge, calling in favors to expedite a restraining order. He acknowledged Elena with a nod, finishing the conversation with cool efficiency. Gallagher's going to be very unhappy when he discovers his bank accounts are frozen and his employer has suddenly decided to let him go, Dominic said after hanging up. Sometimes the best way to neutralize a threat is to make someone too busy dealing with their own problems to create new ones. You're going to destroy his life. I'm going to make it extremely inconvenient for him to continue terrorizing women. If that destroys his life, he did it to himself. Dominic stood, moving around the desk. How's Jessica? Scared but willing to stay. She needs to know we can actually protect her. We can. We will. He pulled Elena close, and she went willingly, still marveling at how natural this had become. The casual intimacy, the easy affection, the partnership that had grown from their arranged marriage. How are you doing? Frustrated? Every time we help someone, there are 10 more who need it. It's overwhelming sometimes. You can't save everyone, Elena. You can only do what you can do. I know, but knowing it and accepting it are different things. She rested her head against his chest. Sometimes I look at these women and I see myself at 12, at 15, at 22, and I want to protect all of them from every horrible thing that could happen. That's what makes you good at this work. It's also what will burn you out if you're not careful. Dominic tilted her chin up. You've been working 16-hour days for weeks. When's the last time you took a break? I don't need... You do. You're exhausted, running on fumes and determination. His voice softened. Let someone else carry the weight for a day. Come away with me this weekend. Just the two of us. Elena wanted to refuse, wanted to insist she was fine, that there was too much work to do. But the truth was she was tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with carrying other people's trauma alongside her own. Where? She asked. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere you can actually rest. Dominic smiled. Trust me? She did. That was still surprising sometimes. How completely she trusted this man who'd started as a stranger and become the most important person in her life. They left Friday evening, driving north along Lake Michigan until they reached a small coastal town that felt like it existed outside of time. Dominic had rented a cottage overlooking the water. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a fireplace and windows that framed the sunset. Elena stood on the deck, watching waves crash against the shore, feeling tension she'd been carrying for months finally begin to ease. Better? Dominic asked, handing her a glass of wine. Much better. She leaned against him. Thank you for this. You needed it. We both did. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just different. Dominic set down his wine and turned to face her fully. We've been married for almost 2 years, but it's always been this strange halfway thing. Legal marriage, real partnership, but never quite acknowledged as what it actually became. Elena's heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to marry you again, properly this time. Not because our families arranged it, not because it served business interests, but because I love you, and I want everyone to know it. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring. Simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the fading light. Elena Hale, will you marry me? Again? For real this time? Elena stared at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life they'd built from the wreckage of trauma and violence. 2 years ago, she'd stood at an altar and spoken vows that meant nothing. Now she was being given the chance to speak them again with full knowledge of what they meant. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger, different from the elaborate band she'd received at their first wedding, more meaningful because it represented choice instead of obligation. Then he kissed her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her cry. They were married again 3 months later in July, with a ceremony that was everything their first wedding hadn't been. Small, intimate, filled with people who actually cared about them, rather than people obligated to attend. Maria was there, along with the other survivors who'd become Elena's chosen family. Dr. Mitchell officiated, speaking about transformation and healing and the courage it took to choose love after experiencing its opposite. Dominic's vows made Elena cry, promises about partnership, respect, choosing each other every day regardless of what the world demanded. Her own vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. I choose you. I choose us. I choose the life we're building together. When they kissed as husband and wife for the second time, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. The reception was held at the mansion's garden, transformed by lights and flowers into something magical. There were no crime bosses in attendance, no political power plays disguised as celebration. Just joy, genuine and uncomplicated. I can't believe you actually did it, Marco said, approaching Elena during a quiet moment. The massive bodyguard looked uncomfortable in his formal suit, but genuinely happy. Married the boss twice. That's dedication. Someone has to keep him in line, Elena said with a smile. You've done more than that, ma'am. You've changed him, made him remember there's more to life than power and survival. Marco's expression turned serious. Thank you for that. After he left, Elena found herself thinking about change, how much she'd transformed in 2 years, how different her life was from the terrified ghost who'd whispered, "Please don't touch me," on her first wedding night. She'd found her voice, built something meaningful, helped others escape the hell she'd survived. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found love in the last place she'd expected it. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, appearing at her side with champagne. "How far we've come. How different everything is." "Good different?" "The best different." Elena took his hand. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here, actually happy, married to you by choice instead of obligation, I wouldn't have believed them. 2 years ago, I thought I was incapable of caring about anything beyond my organization. Dominic pulled her close as music started playing. "You proved me wrong about a lot of things." They danced as the sun set, surrounded by people who loved them, and Elena felt something she'd thought was impossible for most of her life. Peace. The months that followed brought new challenges and unexpected joys. The Phoenix Foundation expanded, opening 3 more locations across Illinois. Elena hired a full staff, trained counselors and advocates, built a network that could function without her constant oversight. She was learning to delegate, to trust others to carry the mission forward. Dominic, meanwhile, had been making changes to his own organization. He'd begun shifting away from the most violent aspects of his business, investing in legitimate enterprises, using his resources to create legal opportunities instead of criminal ones. It was a slow process. You couldn't just walk away from 30 years of underworld connections. But he was trying. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a good man," he told Elena one evening as they reviewed foundation finances together. "I've done too much, hurt too many people, but I can choose to be better than I was. For you. For the life we're building." "You're already better than you think," Elena said. "You protected me when no one else would. You fought for justice when the system failed. You've used your power to help the powerless. That matters. It's the bare minimum of human decency. In our world, it's revolutionary." They were interrupted by Elena's phone ringing, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Elena Hale?" The voice was female, young, frightened. "My name is Sarah. I got your number from the Phoenix Foundation website. I need help. Please, I need—" "Slow down," Elena said gently, putting the phone on speaker so Dominic could hear. "You're safe right now. Tell me what's happening." Sarah's story spilled out. An abusive husband, 2 small children, nowhere to go because he'd isolated her from family and controlled all their money. She'd been planning to leave for months, but was terrified of what he'd do if she tried. "Where are you right now?" Elena asked. "At a gas station. I told him I was getting milk. I have maybe 20 minutes before he starts calling." Elena looked at Dominic, who was already on his phone, texting rapid instructions to Marco. "Sarah, I'm sending someone to get you. A security professional named Marco Russo, big guy, looks intimidating, but he's completely trustworthy. He's going to take you and your children somewhere safe. Can you stay at that gas station for 15 minutes? Yes. Yes, I can do that." "Good. Marco will be there in 12 minutes. Do you have the children with you?" "No, they're at home. Oh God, I can't leave them." "We'll get them too. But right now I need you to stay calm and wait for Marco. Can you do that for me?" Sarah agreed, her voice shaking but determined. Elena stayed on the phone with her, talking her through the panic, until Marco confirmed he had her in protective custody. "Now the children," Dominic said, already coordinating with his team. "We need to extract them without alerting the husband." What followed was a carefully orchestrated operation that would have been illegal in any context that didn't involve saving children from an abusive home. Dominic's people posed as CPS workers, arrived with legitimate-looking paperwork, and removed Sarah's children with such professional efficiency that her husband didn't even realize it was a setup until hours later. By the time he figured it out, Sarah and her children were in a secure location with a restraining order being filed and divorce papers being prepared. You just kidnapped 2 children, Elena said, watching the operation unfold through Marco's body camera footage. I rescued 2 children from an abusive environment, Dominic corrected. There's a difference. The law might disagree. The law, Dominic said coldly, has failed to protect those children for years. Sometimes you have to work outside the system to get actual justice. Elena knew he was right, even if it made her uncomfortable. They'd learned that lesson with Victor. Sometimes the system worked, and sometimes you had to take matters into your own hands. Sarah's case became a blueprint for how the Phoenix Foundation handled high-risk extractions. They developed protocols, built relationships with sympathetic police officers and judges, created a network that could move quickly when lives were at stake. Not every case ended well. Some women went back to their abusers despite every resource offered. Some were found before they could escape. The work was heartbreaking and frustrating and necessary in equal measure. But there were victories too. Women who escaped rebuilt their lives, thrived. Children who grew up safe. Abusers who faced actual consequences. Elena kept photos of the success stories in her office. Maria, who'd gone back to school and was now studying to become a therapist. Jessica, who'd started a small business and was financially independent. Sarah, whose divorce was finalized and who had full custody of her children. Each photograph was a reminder that the work mattered, that change was possible, that survival could become something more than just breathing. 2 years after their second wedding, on a cold December evening, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the test for a full minute, her mind spinning. They'd never explicitly discussed children, had been too focused on healing, on building the foundation, on learning how to be partners. But now, confronted with the reality, Elena felt a complex tangle of emotions she couldn't quite name. Terror was definitely in there. The thought of bringing a child into their complicated world, of being responsible for someone so vulnerable, of potentially passing on trauma she was still healing from, it was overwhelming. But underneath the fear was something else. Hope, maybe. The possibility that she could give a child the love and safety she'd never received, the chance to create something beautiful with the man who'd shown her what protection actually looked like. She told Dominic that night, handing him the test without preamble. He stared at it the same way she had, long, silent, processing. Then he looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before, vulnerable and terrified and hopeful all at once. "How do you feel?" he asked. Scared, excited, overwhelmed, all of it at once. Elena sat beside him. "How do you feel?" "The same, plus concerned that I have no idea how to be a father. My own father was—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Not a good role model." "Neither was mine. But we can choose to be different. We can choose to give our child what we never had." "Can we?" Dominic's voice was raw. "Elena, I'm a crime boss. I've killed people. I run an organization built on violence and corruption. What kind of father does that make me?" "The kind who went to war to protect someone he barely knew. The kind who uses his power to help the powerless. The kind who chose to change because he wanted to be better." Elena took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "You're not your father, Dominic. You're the man who saved me. And you'll be a good father because you'll choose to be." They sat together in the quiet, processing the magnitude of this unexpected gift. "A baby," Dominic said finally, wonder creeping into his voice. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Elena confirmed, and felt the fear recede slightly, replaced by cautious joy. The pregnancy was complicated, not medically, but emotionally. Elena had nightmares about failing as a mother, about passing on trauma, about her child suffering the way she had. Dr. Mitchell helped her work through the anxiety, reminding her that awareness of potential problems was the first step to preventing them. Dominic was simultaneously protective and terrified. He baby-proofed the mansion months before necessary, hired additional security, read every parenting book he could find with the same intensity he brought to planning criminal operations. "You're going to be insufferable when she's actually born," Elena said, watching him install the third redundant security system in the nursery. "She? I have a feeling—" "A daughter," Elena smiled. "A daughter who will have you wrapped around her tiny finger from day one." "A daughter," Dominic repeated, and Elena saw him melt at the thought. "She'll be terrifying, just like her mother." Their daughter was born on a sunny August morning, healthy and loud and perfect. They named her Sophie, a name that meant wisdom, a hope for the future they wanted to give her. Elena held her daughter for the first time and felt something break open in her chest, a love so fierce and immediate it was almost painful. This tiny person, who knew nothing of the darkness her parents had survived, who existed as pure possibility. "She's perfect," Dominic whispered, touching Sophie's tiny hand with gentle reverence. "How did we make something this perfect?" "I have no idea," Elena said honestly. "But we did." Sophie became the center of their world. Elena took 6 months away from the foundation to focus on motherhood, learning how to care for this tiny person who depended on her completely. It was exhausting and beautiful and terrifying, all the things she'd expected and several she hadn't. But the hardest part was confronting her own trauma through the lens of parenthood. When Sophie cried, Elena had panic responses she couldn't fully control. Terror that she was failing, that she was hurting instead of helping, that she was becoming her own parents. Dr. Mitchell increased their sessions, helping Elena separate past trauma from present reality. "You're not abusing Sophie when you struggle with sleep deprivation," Dr. Mitchell said firmly during one session. "You're not neglecting her when you need help. You're not failing when you don't know instinctively what she needs. You're a new mother learning, just like every other new mother. Your past doesn't make you incapable of love." Slowly, with support and therapy and Dominic's steady presence, Elena learned to trust herself as a mother. She learned that love didn't have to be perfect to be real, that making mistakes didn't mean she was broken, that Sophie was safe, loved, protected in ways Elena had never been. Dominic, meanwhile, transformed into a father with the same completeness he brought to everything else. He was patient through sleepless nights, gentle during diaper changes, utterly besotted with his daughter in a way that made Elena fall in love with him all over again. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted one night, holding Sophie while she slept. "A family, real happiness, something worth protecting that wasn't about power or control." "You deserve it," Elena said. "We both do." The Phoenix Foundation continued growing even during Elena's maternity leave, the staff she'd built keeping the mission alive and expanding. When Sophie was 6 months old, Elena returned part-time, bringing her daughter to the office and normalizing the idea that mothers could be leaders and caregivers simultaneously. Sophie became the Foundation's unofficial mascot, a symbol of hope, of the future they were building for all survivors. The women who came through the program loved her, saw in her tiny face the possibility that life after trauma could include joy. On Sophie's first birthday, they celebrated at the mansion with the chosen family they'd built. Marco and his wife, Dr. Mitchell, Maria, and several other survivors who'd become close friends. The Foundation staff who'd become extended family. Elena stood on the terrace, watching Dominic hold their daughter while she gleefully destroyed a cupcake, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the improbable journey that had brought them here. "You look happy," Maria said, joining her. "I am, truly happy, for the first time in maybe ever." Elena smiled. "It's strange. 2 years ago I couldn't imagine surviving. Now I can't imagine anything other than this." "You've earned it. You survived hell and came out the other side stronger." Maria hugged her. "Thank you. For everything you've done for me, for all of us, for showing us what's possible." After the party, after guests had left and Sophie was asleep in her crib, Elena and Dominic sat together in the library, the same room where she'd spent so many sleepless nights during those first terrible weeks of marriage. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Dominic asked. "When I found the bruises?" "I begged you not to touch me," Elena said quietly. "You did. And I promised you'd be safe, that nothing would happen without your consent." He pulled her closer. "I meant it then. I mean it now. Every day I wake up grateful that you trusted me enough to build this life together. I'm grateful too. For you, for Sophie, for the Foundation, for everything we've created from the wreckage." Elena traced patterns on his chest. "Sometimes I think about that terrified girl at the altar, and I wish I could tell her that it gets better, that 2 years later she'll be happy in ways she can't even imagine. She survived long enough to become you. That's its own kind of miracle." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their home, Sophie's soft breathing over the baby monitor, Mrs. Chen moving quietly through the kitchen, the distant hum of the city beyond their walls. Years passed in a blur of milestones and challenges and quiet joys. Sophie grew from infant to toddler to a bright, fierce 4-year-old who had inherited Elena's determination and Dominic's strategic mind. The Phoenix Foundation expanded to 12 locations across 3 states, helping thousands of survivors escape abuse and rebuild their lives. Dominic gradually transformed his organization, divesting from criminal enterprises and investing in legitimate businesses. It was a long process. Some connections couldn't be severed cleanly, some histories couldn't be erased, but he was committed to giving Sophie a father she could be proud of. Elena continued therapy, continued healing, continued learning that survival was just the first step on a much longer journey toward wholeness. Some days were harder than others. Anniversaries of trauma, unexpected triggers, moments when the past crashed into the present without warning. But she had support now. A partner who understood. A daughter who depended on her. A purpose that gave meaning to her pain. On Sophie's 5th birthday, Elena and Dominic stood in the garden watching their daughter play with children from the foundation, kids whose mothers had escaped abuse, who were learning what safety felt like. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to build this life with me?" Dominic looked at her like she'd asked if he regretted breathing. "Never. Not once. You gave me something I didn't know I was missing, a reason to be better than I was. You gave me the same thing." "Then I'd say we're even." Sophie ran over, her dark hair flying, her expression alight with joy. "Mama, Papa, come play with us." Elena and Dominic allowed themselves to be pulled into the game, becoming pirates and princesses, and whatever else Sophie's imagination demanded. And as Elena chased her daughter around the garden, laughing with genuine happiness, she thought about how far she'd come. From invisible to seen, from victim to survivor to something beyond either word. From a girl who'd whispered, "Please don't touch me," to a woman who'd built an empire of protection from her own pain. She thought about Victor Langston, rotting in a prison grave. His legacy nothing but the lives he'd destroyed and the justice that had finally found him. She thought about her father, living in exile and disgrace, having lost everything he'd valued more than his daughter. She thought about all the men who'd looked away, who'd known and done nothing, who'd chosen convenience over courage. And then she stopped thinking about them entirely, because they'd already taken enough of her time. Instead, she focused on Sophie's laughter, on Dominic's hand finding hers, on the life they'd built from impossible circumstances. That evening, after Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, Elena stood in the nursery watching her daughter dream. Dominic appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That real power isn't control," Elena said softly, echoing words he'd once spoken. "It's protecting what matters without breaking it." "Took me 30 years to learn that lesson. You taught it to me." "We taught each other." Elena turned in his arms. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself, for loving me when I didn't know I was worthy of love. You were always worthy. You just needed someone to prove it." Dominic kissed her forehead. "I love you, Elena Hale. Every broken piece, every scared moment, every fierce, brilliant, extraordinary part of you. I love you too, my reluctant hero, my unlikely savior, my partner in building something beautiful from ashes." They stood together in the soft glow of the nightlight, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to create light. Sophie stirred in her crib, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into sleep. She would grow up knowing she was loved, protected, valued. She would never know the terror of invisible pain, the silence of abuse, the horror of being alone with a monster. She would know safety, choice, the fierce protection of parents who'd learned what love actually meant. And that, Elena thought, was the truest victory of all, not just surviving, not just healing, but creating a future where the next generation never had to endure what they had. Years later, when Sophie was grown and the foundation had helped tens of thousands of survivors, when Elena's story had become legend in circles of women fighting back against abuse, someone asked her what she'd learned from her journey. Elena thought about the terrified 12-year-old who'd endured her first assault, about the silent teenager who'd believed no one would ever believe her, about the young woman who'd stood at an altar and whispered a desperate plea, about the survivor who'd found her voice and used it to change the world. I learned that silence protects abusers, but truth sets survivors free, she said. I learned that real strength isn't enduring pain, it's refusing to let pain define you. I learned that love, real love, looks like someone going to war to protect you, then giving you space to save yourself. And if you could tell that scared girl at the altar one thing, what would it be? Elena smiled, thinking of Dominic, of Sophie, of the life she'd built from the ruins of trauma. I'd tell her to hold on, that in 2 years she'll stand in a courtroom and watch her abuser sentenced to life in prison, that in 4 years she'll marry the man who saved her, by choice this time, that in 6 years she'll hold her daughter and feel joy so pure it makes her cry, that the darkness doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will. She paused, her voice strengthening with conviction. I'd tell her that she's not alone, that she's stronger than she knows, and that one day she'll help thousands of other women find the freedom she fought so hard to claim. I'd tell her that survival is just the beginning of the story. The best parts, the healing, the love, the purpose, come after. And what would you tell the man who saved you? That he didn't save me. He gave me the safety to save myself, and that made all the difference. Elena returned home that evening to find Dominic in his study, reviewing legitimate business contracts instead of criminal enterprises, and Sophie doing homework at his desk while chattering about her day at school. The mansion that had once felt like a prison was now filled with laughter and light, and the chaotic beauty of family. She stood in the doorway, watching the two people she loved most in the world, and felt the weight of her journey settle into something like peace. The scars would always be there, physical and psychological, visible and hidden. Some wounds never fully healed, but they'd become part of her story rather than the whole of it. She was Elena Hale, survivor, advocate, mother, wife. She'd been broken and had chosen to rebuild. She'd been silenced and had found her voice. She'd been invisible and had become impossible to ignore. And most importantly, she'd learned that real power wasn't the ability to control or destroy. Real power was choosing to protect what mattered, to love without conditions, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of pain. Real power was surviving the darkness and still choosing to create light. That night, as Elena tucked Sophie into bed, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, why do you help all those sad ladies at your work?" Elena smoothed her daughter's hair, considering how to explain trauma to a child who'd never known it. "Because once upon a time, I was a sad lady too. And someone helped me when I needed it most. Now I help others the same way." "Papa helped you?" "He did. He showed me what being safe felt like, what being loved looked like, what being strong meant." Sophie thought about this for a moment. "When I grow up, I want to help people too, just like you and Papa." Elena's heart swelled. "You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart, as long as you're kind and brave and remember that your voice matters." "My voice matters," Sophie repeated solemnly, as if committing it to memory. After her daughter fell asleep, Elena returned to the library where Dominic waited. She curled against him on the couch, feeling his arms come around her with familiar warmth. "Sophie wants to help people when she grows up," Elena said. "Of course she does. She's your daughter." Dominic kissed the top of her head. "She's going to change the world just like you did. We changed it together." "We did, and we'll keep changing it. For her. For everyone who needs protection. For everyone who needs to know that survival is possible." Elena closed her eyes, listening to Dominic's heartbeat, feeling the peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd been invisible for 12 years had found her voice. The woman who'd been broken had rebuilt herself into something stronger than before. The survivor had become a warrior, fighting for others the way someone had once fought for her. And the reluctant bride who'd whispered, "Please don't touch me," had discovered that true love looked like a man who'd heard that plea and spent every day since proving she was safe, valued, and cherished beyond measure. This was her story. Not of perfect healing or complete recovery, those were fairy tales that real trauma didn't allow, but of choosing to live instead of just survive, of building meaning from pain, of transforming darkness into light, not by pretending the shadows didn't exist, but by refusing to let them define the whole picture. Elena Hale had walked through hell and emerged on the other side with her humanity intact, and she'd used that journey to build a bridge for others still trapped in the flames. That was real power. That was real victory. That was love forged in fire, tested, tempered, and unbreakable.